Hey friends, welcome to Dishing on Divorce on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. Like many of you, my life didn't take a straight path, or at least not the path I had dreamed of. I was an attorney, then a nonprofit leader, a Jewish educator, a spiritual counselor, and now a divorce coach. And I'm also a divorced mom of 3 now grown kids. I know the fear and the overwhelm of divorce firsthand. And I'm here to provide help in ways that are obvious, yet not so obvious. You can think of me as your guide on the side. This week on Dishing on Divorce, I'm diving into one of the most misunderstood topics in relationships, prenups. Whether you're newly engaged, blending families, or remarrying later in life, this conversation is for you. We'll unpack what prenups really mean, not as a sign of mistrust, but as a foundation for clarity, care, and future peace of mind. When people hear the word prenup, they often think of Hollywood drama or mistrust. But really, a prenup isn't about planning for failure. It's about planning for clarity. It's a conversation about how you and your partner want to navigate your financial lives together, not when you're in crisis. Today's guest is Nicole Kobis. Nicole Kobis is a partner at the New Jersey law firm of Lindabury in their divorce and family law group. Nicole is a powerhouse. She works tirelessly for her clients as they navigate the challenges of divorce. And she dedicates her practice to matrimonial law on matters involving divorce, custody, spousal support, child support, equitable distribution, and domestic violence. She's experienced in all areas of family law, including negotiating as well as mediating difficult divorces. One thing she shared with me prior to our talk today is that one of her favorite roles is helping clients draft and review prenuptial agreements. And that's before they get married. Clarity can be romantic, and working with clients in this space is her pleasure. So Nicole, thanks for joining us and welcome to Dishing on Divorce.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's great having you. I always start my sessions with the same question, my show with the same question. Nicole, what's your story? What led you to want to work in the divorce space?
So believe it or not, law is my second career. I actually was in public relations and marketing in the fashion industry right after I graduated college. Planned Fashion Week, went to a lot of cool events, met a ton of people, got to travel, and I just felt like I wanted to do more with people. And while I was working, I studied for my LSAT. And when I went to law school, I actually interned for a judge who was on the family law docket. And I fell in love with it. And fast forward to 3 years of law school, I clerked for the head of the family division at the time in one of our local counties. And I was then recruited to the firm that I've been at ever since. So to say I kind of fell into it and I haven't left. But it's really, I love being able to work with people. And that was really at the crux of what I wanted to do for a living.
Right. There's so much that's in there. You know, I did corporate litigation and you're not really working with people. I didn't work with people until I was working with small claims in a big bankruptcy. And then I was working with people. But what you say makes it so personal. And this is people at a really challenging moment in their lives. So you're not just working with people, you're helping move people forward so that they can craft a new, fresh start.
And absolutely. I could not have said it better.
Thank you. So let's talk about today's topic, prenups. What is a prenup?
So a prenup, which is short for prenuptial agreement, it's an agreement that two people will enter into prior to getting married. And it can deal with a slew of different issues before the wedding. And then what I always say to my clients is hopefully you spend the money, you draft it the right way, you sign it, you put it in a drawer, and you never look at it ever again. That is the ultimate goal of a prenup. But unfortunately, if you do have to look at it again, you have everything in one place and decided ahead of time. So you don't have to deal with so many of the sticky financial issues when you're in a time of likely conflict.
Yeah. I mean, divorce is a time of high conflict, high emotional overwhelm, high discomfort and uncertainty, and you're grieving. And, in other contexts, we're told don't make any big decisions when you're in that first year of grieving. But when you're in divorce, you have to make the biggest decisions during the most disorienting time of your life. So, what do you think is essential for a prenup or for people to think about when they're first, in that zone of, okay, we're getting married. We want it to be romantic, but we're talking about money.
Well, I think it's the misconception of what prenups are. Prenups don't set you up for a divorce. They don't set you up for failure. They set you up to have those difficult conversations in good times rather than have to make those decisions in likely bad times. So it deals with really mainly financial issues. And the hallmark of any good relationship is clear and open communication. And that's all a prenup is. It doesn't mean that we're going to have to use this. It doesn't mean that we are going to end our marriage. It just means that you're going to have a healthy dialogue about what is to come and what is expected to come in the event this doesn't work out. Life happens. No one gets married thinking they're going to get divorced. You want to get married to begin with. So the misnomer of you're going to be set up for failure if you have a prenup, it's just not the case anymore. And a prenup is for anyone. And I think that's another misconception that's out there. It's not just for the rich and famous. You don't need to have $1 million in the bank in order to have a prenup that could help you in some way. And it just allows you to start those conversations and the expectations of what your financial picture in your marriage is going to be like before you walk down the aisle.
Yeah. And before you even know what the financial picture could be, you start thinking about big things. It actually helps you visualize your future together so that you see what path you want to take and you recognize where there could be some twists and turns. I really think that everyone should consider this before they get married as just like another step in the planning the wedding process.
Absolutely.
I heard Jim Sexton, who is who's a very well-known divorce public speaker, and he says that you actually have a prenup, whether it's a contract you agree to or it's just the laws of the state that you live in, right? Because without a prenup, the state law decides what happens to your assets in case of divorce. So wouldn't you want to be in control of those decisions up front rather than leave it to a legislature that doesn't know your family?
Absolutely. And sometimes the law is not meant to be personalized. The law is meant to apply to everyone. And sometimes the application of the law isn't fair and it doesn't feel great. And you wish that you could do things differently. And sure, in the course of negotiating a matrimonial settlement agreement and a divorce, if you agree to something else, great. And if you and your spouse can live with whatever that agreement is, even better. But if you can't agree to it, then you're left to whatever the law says and how that's going to be applied to your case. And that just might not sit well.
Yeah, it might not sit well, but also that's what you're going to fight over, right? And that's going to make any process more stressful, more combative, more difficult for your kids if there are kids in the picture. So the idea that you decided these things in a time of peace and love is really proactive, right? We're talking about how are we proactive for the future of our lives? I talk to a lot of people who sort of see themselves as the victim and that life happened to them. But when you draft a prenup, you are happening to life, right? You are taking control. So I know you said that like prenups can cover lots of things, but what are things that a prenup can cover that people might not think about?
Absolutely. So they cover spousal support, which in most states is referred to as alimony. They can cover the division of assets. So an asset can be anything. It could be a house, it could be a bank account, it can be a retirement account, it could be a pension, it could be a closely held business. It could be a car, it could be jewelry, it could be collectibles, art, any kind of asset that is accumulated either by someone before the marriage or during the marriage. It can also cover things like death. Most people obviously have a will that they put in place, but there are certain provisions that you can put in regarding what would happen in the event you were to pass away when you have a prenup that then you can change later on in a will, but it allows you to have, again, that foundation. And even if you do not choose to go forward and get a prenuptial agreement drafted, at minimum, you should meet with an attorney to discuss what a prenup could do for you. Knowledge is power. Make a decision, an informed decision. And yes, I'm sure there's plenty of people who go for a consultation with an attorney about a prenup and they're like, you know what, this isn't my thing. I'm not going to do this. I don't want to have those difficult conversations. It's not for me. And that's to be respected, but at least you're making that decision after being informed about what it could do for you. The one thing a prenup does not ever deal with are children. So you cannot put in anything about child custody. You cannot put in anything about child support. Those decisions are made, unfortunately, at the time of a divorce in the best interest of the child or children at that time.
Got it. Got it. So you can't include on the potential children you're going to have in the marriage in the agreement. If you have, if it's a second marriage and there are children already who are part of the family, like how could that work?
So that is a great reason why you would want to have a prenup, because in most states, you do have to leave some amount of wealth to a spouse in the event of death or in the event if you're going to divide your assets upon divorce. But as someone who has a child coming into a marriage, you might want to leave more money or more wealth to that child. You might also want to leave something to your new spouse. But again, like we said, that there's laws and there is statutes that govern what you have to do. If you don't have a prenup, you're left to be abiding by what those laws are, which could mean potentially having your assets be divided in a way that you wish they weren't divided.
Right, right. You mentioned earlier that, of course, you're going to have a will too, but a lot of people stall on that. Like that's something that, again, it's a future focused event, and people are terrified to put something down in writing. So how do you they seem like they might be similar in that sort of internal pullback. What do you think?
It absolutely is. And I think especially with coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it made a lot of people stop and think about what they want the trajectory of their lives to be, what they want to happen, that death and bad things don't necessarily happen when you are, a senior citizen, but they could also happen at a much younger age, unfortunately. And again, it's about those hard decisions. One of the things that I know, candidly from clients, they don't do wills because they don't know who to leave their children to. And it's that question of, okay, that's a really hard thing to come to terms with, that if you're not here, who's going to raise your child? There is no question about that's probably the most difficult decision anyone could ever have to make. But would you rather decide that? Or would you rather a judge who's met your family on probably hundreds of pieces of paper that you submitted to the court, who's maybe met your child once, if at all, but they're okay making the decision? It's about, yes, facing the fears, but also staying in control of what you can control and what feels right for you and your family.
Right, right. It's so hard because as you said that, I'm thinking about, a lot of people wait to make their will until they have kids, because that's really what feels most significant. And then you're thinking, all right, I'm going to have to ask that person if they will be the guardian. And then if I don't ask that person, will I offend that person? So there's a lot of drama that's part of it. But again, let's get some clarity. We're planning for what we hope doesn't happen.
Absolutely. Right? It's an insurance policy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You buy medical insurance hoping that besides going for a checkup, you never have to be sent to the hospital and have an astronomical hospital bill. Doesn't mean you don't buy the insurance. You buy the insurance to safeguard against what may happen.
Right.
It's the same thing. And unfortunately, I think because of Hollywood and because of the news, prenups have this, misnomer that, they set you up for failure. And it's not the case at all.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that people feel like, I think it's that the prenups people hear about are only because a marriage has failed, right?
Yeah.
They don't hear about those stories where, I did a prenup and, I married 65 years. People don't hear about that, but also maybe it wasn't in the vernacular at that time, even though it should be, because you always should be prepared for circumstances you don't expect.
And especially with individuals getting married later in life, second marriages, third marriages, there is a higher rate of people coming into marriages, not necessarily on the same financial footing. Yeah. Because maybe someone has worked for longer. Maybe someone has already purchased a house that now you both are living in. Those are very common scenarios now with people getting married. And you have to also think about, family wealth, inheritances. If you know that your family has, a large business that they own that one day you are going to inherit, you likely are going to want to keep that business in your familial line. And yes, does that mean your spouse could never work in that business? Of course not. You could always make whatever other agreements subsequent to a prenup that you want to. But if you don't have something to fall back on, then you're left to what the law is going to provide.
Right. So we're going to stop there for our mid interview break for a word from our sponsor. But Nicole, this has been so great, and I can't wait to go even deeper. So with that, we'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And we're back with Nicole Kobis of Lindenbury Law Firm. We are talking about prenups, myths and facts, right? So what is needed in New Jersey and other states for a prenup to be valid?
So in New Jersey and in many other states, you need to have full financial disclosure. So meaning that is usually at the end of a prenuptial agreement, there is an asset disclosure sheet that lists anything that you own now. So do you own a house? Do you own a car? Do you have retirement accounts? Do you have bank accounts? Do you have any expensive jewelry, collectible items? Do you have any life insurance policies? And then also list what debts are out there. Do you have a mortgage? Do you have a car note? Do you have credit card debt? Do you have student loan debt? So that way everyone knows fully what they are either waiving off of in a prenuptial agreement or what they're getting themselves into in a prenuptial agreement, depending on what side you're on. In addition, in New Jersey, while it's not a requirement, it is wise for both parties to have separate counsel. You cannot use the same attorney, but it is wise that both of you retain separate counsel so that way you're being advised fully of what your rights are, what you're giving up, and to make sure that someone is in your corner and advising you of what's best for you. There is also obviously the concern of being under duress. So you want to make sure that both people have enough time to read the agreement, enough time to negotiate the agreement, enough time to determine whether or not they feel it is fair and equitable, given the situation and the financial positions at the time. And yes, do a lot of prenups get signed close to wedding dates? Of course they do. Because again, like we were talking about before, no one wants to face the facts that they're entering into a prenuptial agreement. So even prenups that are started months before a wedding very likely end up getting signed within the month of the wedding. But you want to make sure that you're not sitting, at your bridal table getting your hair done and signing your prenuptial agreement. You don't want something like that where someone could then turn around and say, well, if I didn't sign this, the photographer was waiting to take my pictures. So you want to have a little more time than that.
Yeah. Well, is there a minimum time before the wedding in order for the prenup to be valid? Because I've actually read that in some states that's the case.
In New Jersey, there isn't, but I will typically put language in an agreement that is being signed closer to a wedding, that it's been negotiated over several months, because that is the likelihood of what has occurred. And just for reasons, whether people live out of state, whether it's just they haven't gotten around to getting all of the financial disclosure documents, people have had enough time to consider the topic of, I'm getting a prenup and this is what's going to be in it, even if my signature didn't appear, 4 months before.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Let's see, when, like, technically speaking, or just, logistically speaking, so each party needs their own attorney, but does one attorney write it up and then the other review it? Is that sort of the process of how it works?
Yeah. So one attorney will be the drafting attorney, and that could either be the spouse that has more money or the spouse that doesn't have more money. It doesn't really matter who drafts it. And then the other attorney is the review attorney. So they will review the draft with their client, and they will submit changes and edits that they feel are appropriate based on what's in their client's best interest.
Got it.
I don't think I've ever had a prenup that you draft it and the other side is like, yep, good to go. Where do I sign? There's always something. But you also want to empower your clients, or at least I feel it's important to empower your clients. I want them to have these conversations with their spouse. I'm here to draft, and I'm here to advise you of what can go into a prenup, what you are waiving off of, what the law would do if you didn't have a prenup. But I'm not responsible for having those conversations of what you want your house to look like. Right. I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should have one bank account or whether that makes sense. I'm going to advise you what will be potentially easier for tracking purposes, or what logistically I've seen that seems to work better. But ultimately, you're going to have to tell me if you want both of your paychecks going into one account, or if you want separate accounts and a certain amount of money going into a joint account, for example, to pay the household bills. That's on you to decide, because that's on you to live your life. I'm not checking in with people 10 years into their marriage and say, oh, how are things going? How's your prenup? Have you looked at it? That's just not my role. Right. My role is to empower you to make those decisions, advise you what you should do to make your lives easier. But ultimately, it's up to you to figure out whether or not that's going to be, in the best interest of your family.
Right. And it's really about setting yourself up for success and looking at the whole scenario. Look, financial conversations are some of the hardest conversations people have to have, regardless. And many people go into marriage never having a financial conversation. That's not unusual. What we are suggesting is, let's get down to business, because marriage is a lot of things, but it's also about money. It was a financial institution from the start, as like the foundation of how do people feed themselves, right? How they need to be a financial unit to earn money so that they could feed their family. And that's the beginning, right?
And if you're not having the conversations before you get married, once you get married, you're going to have a conversation of, okay, are we opening up a joint checking account? Or are we just keeping the checking accounts that we've had from before we got married? And then we'll start transferring money, or maybe you'll pay the gas bill, I'll pay the electric bill, we'll split the mortgage. These are all things you're going to talk about of how are you going to save for retirement? Are you both going to contribute to 401k plans? Or maybe if one spouse, let's say, is a pension eligible employee, maybe more money will go into that spouse's account rather than the other spouse. Who's going to pay for health insurance? These are all things that have to come up. You can't avoid them. It's just a matter of whether they're going to come up before you walk down the aisle or once you get married.
And one thing I will add is that in many of the cases that I work with, the people that I work with, they are often women who have not been responsible for the finances of the family. And they often tell me their story as, I didn't know anything. He kept all the financial information from me, and I can't find where all the money is. And you never want to be in that situation. In a healthy marriage, you want to be able to feel confident that you're equal partners in everything. And so this sets you up for that kind of life.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that once you're married, you both need to know precisely the electric bill is due on the 12th of the month and it's $172.50 every month. Of course not. Someone is going to be in charge of paying the bills. We know that that's how most relationships work. But it's still, you need to know approximately my mortgage is about $3,000 a month. I take home from my $150,000 a year job about $115,000 after the payment of health insurance and retirement accounts. Generally speaking, I have many clients that walk through my door when they're getting divorced and they are astonished about how much credit card debt they have. And then when I start asking them for financial information and I start going through their expenses, and you lay it out right there and you say, well, you were only bringing in X, but you were spending Y every year. And time over time, when you can't pay down that debt, that's how it accumulates. It's not that because someone's been draining accounts. It's just, life happens. And if you're not, to your point, having that knowledge, you have no concept of where your money is going in and out.
So this is an opportunity, really, to set yourself up for financial awareness, financial education.
Absolutely.
I have often thought that on the one hand, a prenup is protecting what you had before, the premarital assets. But on the other hand, a prenup is for letting your spouse know how much you care about them because you want to make sure that in any circumstance, they're okay.
Yes.
This is about giving to a person you love.
Yes.
And in a mindset where you want to be giving to each other. And it sort of teaches you a little bit about what money means, especially if you haven't had those conversations before.
Yes. And especially a lot of people, when they get married, it's the first time they're living with someone besides their parents or a college roommate. So it's the first time you're really grappling with those issues of whether I'm a saver, whether I'm a spender, whether or not, I want to go into my family's business. Maybe that's a conversation I've been dreading to have because I don't want to tell my parents I'm not going to keep up this third generation business because it's not what I want to do. Someone who maybe has gone to medical school and has an exorbitant amount of debt, how am I going to pay that off if in the event, I don't take that high paying job and I want to go maybe into the nonprofit sector? Those are all things that, as humans, we avoid those difficult conversations. I don't think anyone inherently likes conflict and likes, grappling with those things, but we have to grapple. Those issues are there.
Yeah, the issues are there. And if you've had a conversation right at the beginning and you put it down in a document, it means that you're taking care of each other as opposed to setting yourself up for failure. You're actually setting yourself up for success.
And getting on the same page.
Yeah.
You might not agree. You might have different philosophies, but at least you know where you both are coming from.
Yeah. And that's huge. That's really huge. So can you tell us some stories about working with people on their prenups and what comes up?
Oh, I mean, you name it, it comes up. A lot of times with a prenup, we're dealing with inheritance or future inheritance, I should say, and family wealth. So there are a lot of scenarios where someone is coming into the marriage knowing that they might have a trust fund in their name that they're going to be able to access one day, or knowing that they're going to inherit a large sum of money from a parent or a grandparent or a relative. So those are always interesting because you get to see, if there are family heirlooms, for example. I've had some, cool heirlooms that I've got to, deal with, and we've had to get appraised and things like that. But often prenups are the average consumer, someone who may be getting married, let's say in their 30s, and they own a townhouse that they worked really hard. It was their first, big purchase after getting, enough savings from their first jobs. And it's something they want to protect. Or it's the person who has maybe sold some stock and, or sold, maybe I've had a few patents that people have now, have owned. So it's really, yes, I've had some pretty cool and unique cases, but overall prenups are for, everyone. So it's, but it's always nice though, because you get to see people when they are happy and when they are coming together and not when, they're at each other's throats. And I often think about my divorce clients when I see them. There's definitely clients that I've had where I look at them and I think, I don't know how you ever got married. You're so different. You had children together. You come from completely different schools of parenting thought. But then there's other clients where you look at them and you're like, life happened to you. Like there is deep love still, and just life happened and you couldn't make it work. And those are the clients that you feel sad for, because maybe if things were different, maybe the outcome wouldn't be the same. But it's always nice to see people and, get the wedding picture from them, or hear about their cool honeymoon that they've taken, or hear about, how they met. I had one client that they met randomly on a trip in Nashville, and it just happened they were, at the same restaurant at the same time. They ran into each other later on somewhere else, cool stories like that you would never ask a client who's getting divorced of, oh, how did you meet your spouse that,
Right.
You can't stand now. So it's nice just to hear about like their stories and just see the excitement and, like experience that with them.
Have you had situations where they get into it in the prenup process and then they decide not to get married?
I have never had that. I did have one client that I can think of off the top of my head who just felt like the prenup was getting to be too much for them. And about 2 weeks before the wedding, one of the individuals had a death in the family, and it was awful. And they were trying to decide, do we postpone the wedding? Do we not? And I think just everything kind of came to a head, and this was the one thing that had to fall off.
Yeah.
And I remember she wrote me a very nice email about it. And I said, don't apologize to me. And, I feel terrible for what you're going through. And, we talked through where things would lay without this prenup. And ultimately she just decided it was just too much for, her to pursue at that time, which I completely understood.
Right. There's so many emotions that are packed into it. And when you're dealing with the stress of getting married plus a death in the family, again, it's like making big decisions. There are so many big decisions at one time. So,
yes.
So this might be the last thing.
Yes.
Exactly. But in most cases, that's not how the timing works.
No,
so,
I would say if I had my ideal timeline, I would like to have about 4 to 6 months before the wedding to start the process. Does that mean I don't get the calls that come in where we're getting married in 6 weeks and we need this done? Of course I get them. I get them all the time. And do we make it happen? We make it happen. But in an ideal world, it gives me time to educate you, for you to go home and have those conversations, and then for us to develop a product that you both are happy with. Because it's very common that we all sit down together and talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? Because at the end of the day, we have to come up with an agreement. So it sometimes doesn't make sense for me to talk to my client to talk to their future spouse, that person to talk to their attorney, and then it's a game of telephone back and forth. It's sometimes just easier, get the 4 of us in a room, let's hash out whatever we have to hash out. No secrets, right? It's all open. So whatever I say to my client, I should be able to also be able to say to their future spouse.
Right. Because this is really as you said, an insurance policy.
Yes.
And if you were purchasing a life insurance policy, you wouldn't hide a medical condition. Right. So here, this is not the time to be hiding. People hide things when they're going through divorce, not during this phase.
Right.
If also, as you said, if this could be a process for anyone, regardless of how much they have in assets, you might be coming into a marriage and you both went to grad school and you both have debts. And that's something you talk about in the prenup.
Yes, absolutely. You don't need to be sitting on a fortune for a prenup to work for you.
Yeah. So that's really powerful. Thank you so much for being on the show, Nicole. You've shared great information. I'm sure that we can talk for a very long time. And next time we'll talk about another one of your areas of expertise.
I'd love that.
So how can my audience find you if they are interested in getting a prenup?
Absolutely. So my email address is nkobis, and it's KOBIS @Lindabury, LINDABURY.com.
Great. And the firm is www.lindabury.com.
Yes.
Great. So this is amazing. I'm sure your clients are so well served. You're easy to talk to. You have a bright smile. So I know that they feel supported and seen. which is really what they need.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That's the highest compliment that you could be given.
Well, thank you. And for my audience, you can always find me, Lisa, at lzlcoaching.com. And my website is www.lzlcoaching.com. Thanks a lot. And we'll see you next time on Dishing on Divorce.